Father Roland Devoe.
I saw the Bedouin arriving one after the other, wanting to see Father Devoe, bringing more fragments for sale.
So tell me what that was like. I mean, here were a group of scholars and then some Bedouins coming in with...
Here came the Bedouin and pulled out from under their clothes a matchbox. And emptied the matchbox in which there were fragments. And when they realized that the bigger fragments fetched a higher price, they tried to stick them together.
The discovery of Cave 4 in 1952 changed the situation dramatically. The cave produced 15,000 fragments. Overwhelmed, Father Devoe appointed an international team to help assemble the scrolls. Located in the Rockefeller Museum in Jordanian-controlled East Jerusalem, the team worked in a basement room that soon became known as the Scrollery.
Everything was deposited in the Rockefeller Museum. Let's imagine in a big box. And then they began to sort them out by examining the quality of the leather, the script, the thickness of the leather, determining this is manuscript A, this is manuscript B, this is manuscript C. And what they did then was to try to assemble their own individual jigsaw puzzles.
So what was the atmosphere like within that small group?
Electric, really. They were all frightfully excited. And at the beginning, they were working 25 hours a day.
But elementary mistakes were being made by Devoe's team, mistakes that seem extraordinary to us now.
Of course, they didn't know how to handle the fragments, that they were sticking them together with sellotape, which is, of course, totally unheard of nowadays. And people having these scrolls, and they were smoking their cigarettes.
So how did Devoe govern the group?
Well, he was the boss in every sense.
Right.
He chose the people, he told them what to do, and he told them what not to do. And the one thing, unfortunately, which he told them not to do was to allow other people access to the unpublished scrolls. The scrolls were considered as it were their propriety until they would release them fully examined, studied, translated, interpreted, and published.
Some people are convinced that Devoe deliberately limited access because the Catholic Church wanted to suppress controversial passages in the scrolls. Author Michael Bagent backs the cover-up theory. When do you believe the Catholic Church first tried to control the information from the scrolls?
Initially, I don't think they took the scrolls seriously. They thought they were forgeries or irrelevant. But the penny really dropped for them when Professor Dupont-Sommet gave a lecture in Paris in the early 50s. And he drew very close parallels between Christianity and the Dead Sea Scrolls, particularly between Jesus and one of the prominent figures mentioned in the scrolls. And this clearly frightened the Vatican.
This prominent figure was the teacher of righteousness mentioned in the scrolls from Cave 1. It seemed to some of the early translators that the teacher of righteousness was a Messiah, and that he had been persecuted, tortured, and martyred. Michael Bagent believes that the Catholic Church felt that this challenged the uniqueness of Jesus.
The Catholic Church has always had a department which controlled teaching and controlled the interpretation of archaeological discoveries. It's under the overall command of what used to be the Inquisition, but is now called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And this particular part got involved in the scrolls to make sure that nothing that was found in the scrolls would clash with Catholic doctrine and dogma.
But Devoe's team was a very large team. Surely, I mean, they all had their different interpretations of what they were coming across in the scroll.
The classic example was that of John Allegro, who certainly took his own line with the scrolls. given that most of the team were Roman Catholic priests, and those who weren't were happy to toe the line by Catholic dogma, whereas John Allegro was an independent scholar, and so he very quickly ran foul of the rest of the team. But interestingly, he was the first to publish his material, so in effect, from my perspective, he was the best scholar there, but they destroyed him.
John Allegro is one of the most controversial figures in the story of the Dead Sea Scrolls. In 1953, he came from England to join DeVoe's team editing the thousands of fragments found in Cave 4. Allegro believed from the outset that their work should be shared with other scholars and the wider public. And in 1956, he made a radio broadcast for the BBC. The key theme was a challenge to the uniqueness of Jesus.
We'll have to discuss later who wrote these scrolls.
He claimed that the Cave 1 scrolls showed that the teacher of righteousness had been crucified. Although this translation has since been discredited, at the time it caused great controversy. Back in Jerusalem, Roland DeVoe was furious and excluded Allegro from the editorial team's work. But Allegro was undeterred and in 1957 made a BBC film about the Dead Sea Scrolls. When his broadcast was repeatedly delayed, he was convinced that the Vatican had persuaded the BBC to keep it off the screens.
Literally hundreds of books have been written about the scrolls.
As we publish more of our texts, the volume of scholarship applied to their problems is likely to increase. But perhaps only the future can tell what their ultimate effect will be on the religious beliefs of mankind.
It was eventually shown, but 2 years after it was made, and even then it was tucked away late at night. But there could have been a perfectly reasonable explanation for that. It seemed harmless enough, except for that rather barbed comment towards the end. But I can see how this combination of church establishment, ancient religious texts, and the length of time it took for information to emerge from this tightly knit group of scholars would lead people to imagine conspiracy theories everywhere. The Catholic Church, and indeed other Christian denominations, probably were wary about what might be found in the scrolls. But now they are fully published, and some exhibited here at the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem. Shrine is exactly the right word for this place because the scrolls on display are treated with an almost sacred reverence. About 500 of the scrolls are copies of Jewish literature of the time. Another 200 are biblical, and a further 200 are the rules and practices of the desert community who probably hid the scrolls. Nothing in these documents has fundamentally undermined the Christian faith. The Vatican still stands. The scrolls do nevertheless overlap with the emergence of Christianity. And no one doubts that they could tell us a great deal about the religious and political atmosphere at the time. So I'm heading back into the desert to a site that archaeologists believe holds the key to the question of who wrote the scrolls. This is Qumran, a ruined settlement a short distance from the caves where the scrolls were found. One of the first archaeologists to properly excavate the site was the director of the École Biblique, Roland DeVoe. Initially, he dismissed it as a Roman fort, but as more caves were discovered in the 1950s, he turned his attention to the Qumran ruins. When he found a scroll jar buried in one of the rooms almost identical to those found in Cave 1, he knew he'd established a strong connection with the scrolls. Professor Jody Magnus is one of the foremost authorities on the site.
one of the things that connects the Dead Sea Scrolls with Qumran is the proximity of the site to the scroll caves. In fact, some of the caves are accessible only from within the site itself. Many scholars, including myself, identify this community with a group called by our ancient sources the Essenes. And the reason is our ancient sources, who include the Jewish historian Josephus, for example, describe a group with beliefs and practices that are very similar to what we read about in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Okay, well, I want you to show me around the ruins. Archaeologists believe that the Essenes occupied this site from about 100 years BC until it was destroyed by the Romans in AD 68 as they crushed the Jewish revolt. So what kind of people were they? During this period, the Essenes were one of a number of Jewish sects jostling for influence.